Hi everyone, this is Eden of LightCycleAstrology.com. Welcome back to the channel, friends. Today we are taking a look at the astrology for the week ahead between February the 5th and the 11th. There is some really interesting astrology coming through for us this week. We'll jump into that here in a moment. Before we do, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit notifications so you don't miss any videos. Leave some comments in the comment section. And you can always find me at LightCycleAstrology.com if you want to find out about a reading. Okay, well, let's jump into it. Lots of interesting things happening this week for us in the skies. Monday, we're getting Mercury entering Aquarius and making a conjunction or bodily union to Pluto. So right off the bat, the week is indicating that there is some interesting intensity coming through for us with that conjunction to Pluto. Now, one thing I do want to go into, so we'll start with this here, is that on Monday, when Mercury ingresses, it's always interesting when planets enter Aquarius for one reason, and that's because Capricorn and Aquarius are signs that are both ruled by ancient traditional Western standards, you could say. Both of those signs are Saturn signs from ancient astrology. So the question could be asked, do you even notice something change when a planet moves from one Saturn sign into the next Saturn sign, because they're both sort of bunched up together in the thema mundi? And of course, the answer is yes, because you still get a changeover of modality, elemental quality, and polarity. What do I mean by that? Well, Mercury in Capricorn was in that earthy Saturn temple that was said to be cardinal, meaning cardinal signs take and they change things into a new season. So there's kind of a pivot or a changeover. Cardinal is almost thought of like a hinge that turns the year into a new season. So this is really interesting. As Mercury was traveling through the sign of Capricorn, it's also going through a sign that was said to be a nighttime sign or feminine sign. If you don't like the way that they classified signs as particular genders being masculine or feminine, you could think of it as yin and yang, or I like to think of it sometimes as like inside or gestational for the nighttime signs, and more extroverted or outwardly pushing for the daytime signs. So you get a changeover of Mercury going from that internal gestational nighttime feminine kind of inwardly action that is having that real earthy kind of changeative quality to it. For instance, this could be a change in, with Mercury, of course, a god related to thinking and ideas and things like that, communication. It could be that when Mercury was in Capricorn, we began to change particular things that we were thinking about. We began to sort of there was thoughts that are perhaps ruminating inside. It's rather like the image of a pregnant woman where there is a lot of stuff happening, as the baby is forming inside her belly, but you don't see that. Aquarius is rather like after the baby is born, and it's visible, it's external, it's pushing outward. So that's kind of the image that you could think about. Mercury going from maybe gestating or ruminating on the inner landscapes of the body or the mind, thoughts sort of percolating and developing, but maybe not being so expressive. As Mercury enters Aquarius, typically you're going to see those things that were gestating sort of come out and be more visible. Now, I say typically here because there is a really interesting condition where Mercury is moving under the beams of the sun. So normally I would say that yes, Mercury is going to change into that daytime masculine yang temple and be much more outwardly spoken. The ideas come out. You're just saying stuff off the cuff. When people say something like, "Oh, you see that guy? That guy has no filter. Whatever comes into his mind, it's out there. He says it." Typically, I would say that's kind of like Mercury in Aquarius. Mercury moving into Aquarius, forming a conjunction with Pluto, is interesting because it speaks to maybe something like having been uh, developing or percolating on the inside, and then all of a sudden there's this intensity. It feels like maybe that idea needs to erupt out almost like a volcano, and it may not be considerate of what other people think or something along those lines. It says, I don't care. I've been thinking about this for a while, and I just have to say it. But the condition of Mercury moving under the beams of the sun, what does that mean? And what is that speaking to? Well, normally I would say Mercury, again, moving into Aquarius, is begin to be more vocalizing of what it thinks and things like that. But when Mercury is 15 degrees before the sun and every day moving closer to the sun, this is the time where Mercury loses visibility in the sky. And if you've watched the channel for a while now, you know that I always go into this. So sorry if this is something I always explain. But, Mercury as a morning star has been rising before sunrise. And until around this time, if you have clear skies, you could go out and you could look before sunrise. There's a little bit of light in the sky, but there's Mercury's faint light that is being reflected by the sun. You can faintly see that starlight. I was so lucky to see this about 2 weeks ago or so. I've only seen Mercury a handful of times. And that's because Mercury is always so close to the sun in its orbit that you have to have like the perfect conditions to see this planet. So I've seen it, I don't know, 3, maybe 4 times in my life. And I live near Mauna Kea in Hawaii, where you can go up and you're 14,000 feet up in the air and you can see the stars really good and all of that. There's not a lot of light pollution and you're above the clouds. Even then, I still have only seen Mercury a little bit. But the omen is always the same. When Mercury moves under the beams and loses visibility, it's rather like, if you think about the animating spirit of being alive, right? And what happens when you die and you pass on, you could still see the body, but the animating spirit has left the body. That's like for a planet, the visibility was like that to the planet. The light was almost akin to the planet's vitality or willpower or something like that. So as the planet becomes invisible and loses the light, it's symbolic of a planet losing its vitality or life force or power or will. So normally I would say you're going to get a way more vocal Mercury here, but moving under the beams at the same time, it has this feeling. It's like there's this felt feeling of, is something wanting to come out and express itself, something that has been in there gestating, ruminating, and it's like now we really want to vocalize what we are thinking about or feeling, but it may fall upon deaf ears, or it may not be seen or noticeable, or it's not the right time for it to gain traction or be listened to or accepted or something along those lines, which of course is very frustrating for us, right? So there's tension there with that Mercury conjunct Pluto that I think is really emblematic. Now, if we roll the real-time clock forward to Thursday, we are going to get 2 aspects that come along and perfect in the sky. We're going to get Mercury perfect a trine to Uranus, and also the same day, the sun perfects a square to Uranus. So we've got some Uranian energy coming in here that is connected to the solar and Venusian archetypal motifs here. Now, it's always, I think, important to, when we look at mundane astrology, what is the astrology that is happening above our heads that is likely to be the most noticeable? Because generally speaking, with transits and things like that, you want to see the aspects that are being made to your natal birth chart, planets that are hitting angles or planets or something like that, or lots, but so when forecasting mundane astrology, if an aspect doesn't, if it doesn't hit something in your birth chart, are you going to feel it? Are you going to notice it? You still can, but it's likely to be the thing that really stands out. So will you notice this trine between Venus and Uranus? Yeah, for some of us, I think we could. Some of us, this aspect may go by and we don't notice a thing about it. So I think that that's probably likely, because I think that the Mercury moving into Aquarius, conjoining Pluto, but moving under the beams all at the same time may serve to sort of drown out some of the other aspects. And I think that that is sort of happening. But if we go forward to Friday, or really on into Saturday, I had this listed as Friday the 10th, but hold on, let me just fix this real quick here. More on Saturday. Sorry, guys. Okay, there we go. So really on Saturday, February the 10th, the new moon comes through. And it's happening right around 20-ish degrees of Aquarius. There we go. So I have Friday, if you're in London, which is what I have my real-time clock set to, it's going to be like 11 p.m. on Friday. But so Friday night, early Saturday morning, the new moon comes through in Aquarius. And because the sun was already, had already perfected that angle to Uranus, the new moon comes through as the sun and moon now are both really close to that square to Uranus. So there is kind of that Uranian archetype baked into the new moon that may be serving to unfold as the lunation cycle unfolds over the month ahead. So this is something that we may notice just in this week, but also that sort of is apparent somehow in the month. And that is always the case with new moons, right? Whatever astrology is happening at the time of the new moon may sort of carry with it as the lunation cycle unfolds over the next 30 days or so. So what could we say about the new moon in Aquarius making that square to Uranus? Well, of course, you get that motif of perhaps, something moving in a unique direction that is seeking liberation, maybe sort of throwing off convention, maybe doing something unique or outside of the box. That is always kind of the motif that you get when you are taking a look at solar Uranian contacts. With the new moon there, it's going to bring in that new cycle symbolism where something maybe is beginning to seed or something is being inseminated at that moment that is going to grow into something larger as time goes on. But I actually want to, and then real quick before we move on Saturday proper, we also have this week featuring a square between Mercury and Jupiter. So that's the last aspect. But I think this Mercury square Jupiter may again be like one of those aspects that is drowned out by the other astrology. So some people may feel this and notice this energy, and some it may go by unnoticed. But what I want to do is take a look at the new moon motifs and Mercury conjoining Pluto motifs. And I actually want to do something a little bit different because as an astrologer that makes content as a practicing Western traditional Hellenistic astrologer, I'm making the mundane forecast around Pluto and Uranus aspects that are forming in the sky this week. But how would ancient astrologers look at the mundane forecast? Would they come up with the same kind of archetypal energetic motifs for the week if Uranus hasn't been discovered yet? If Pluto isn't discovered yet, what are we saying about Mercury moving into Aquarius? In the ancient world, let's say I'm back there in my in my hut and I'm tapping cuneiform glyphs on clay tablets or something, and the delivery boy is going to come in and pass out, deliver all of the tablets to my subscribers or something like that, right? The ancient world version of content creator and subscriber mode, if you will. If you were living in the ancient world and you were about to receive a forecast for the week ahead, in other words, and Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto had not yet been discovered, how can we base this week's astrology around, aspects to Uranus and aspects to Pluto and so on and so forth? Let's compare and contrast this, because you get similar motifs. For instance, with Mercury entering the underworld, that transformation into a new sign, right? Mercury changing signs is kind of similar to Mercury conjoining Pluto, because you get that transformation from the Capricorn nighttime into the Aquarius daytime, different modes of cardinality, different expressions of the elements, and of course the polarity is changing. So Mercury is transitioning, and when planets leave one sign, it is rather like they sort of go through a death process as they leave a sign, and then of course they enter a sign, and it's rather like they are reborn as being in another temple or in another sign that is going to express through that sign's characteristics in that particular way, right? But it's rather more than that. With Pluto, we want to see that intensity, that real underworldly kind of theme. Well, we do in fact get that in a couple of ways. We get Mercury moving under the beams of the sun, losing visibility. That's a much stronger motif of Mercury entering a process that is this death and rebirth kind of thing that is happening, because as Mercury gets closer to the sun, Mercury eventually gets really burned up by the sun and really begins to take heat. And then there will be the Cazimi moment later on down the road. And then as Mercury passes by the sun, now we see the rebirth of Mercury, and the cycle continues on. So there's a very strong motif here, just by traditional standards, of, okay, we have a planet entering a new sign, going through transition that way. We have a planet that is entering into the metaphorical underworld, being under the beams of the sun and losing visibility, about to enter the process of losing visibility, going through the Cazimi, and then being reborn, that we get about 4 times a year. Right. And that will lead eventually to the Mercury retrograde that is, coming up for us. But that this is all serving to give us the same archetypal symbolism, right, of Mercury going by Pluto. Pluto rather acts almost like a modern day shortcut. It says you don't have to factor in the under the beams and transitioning into a new sign and dying out in an old sign and being reborn in a new sign, blah, blah, blah. It's rather like short. It's like Pluto's there. We know there's transformation. So that's almost shorthand. You could think of it like that. But that's one way that you could compare it. Now, if we also think about, well, what about the sun making a square to Uranus that is happening when the new moon comes through? You could also think of that if you take Uranus out of the picture in the ancient way of looking at just the 7 traditional planets, you get similar motifs based on the sun being in Aquarius, a Saturn-ruled sign, and the moon coming through at that time. Because let's actually bring up the real-time clock one more time, and I'll demonstrate why this maybe stands out like this. Okay, so actually, let's even take out the other planets so that we can just see the sun and the moon. Saturn here, ruling the sign of Aquarius, is the thing that will give us that kind of Uranian quality. And I know in modern astrology, Uranus is even the ruler of the sign of Aquarius, right? But how do we get the same Uranian square kind of energy? Well, the winter solstice Capricorn down here is the beginning of winter, and then you have the Aries, or the spring vernal equinox degree between the end of Pisces and the beginning of Aries, is going to be when the new season of spring starts, and it's also when the light half of the year begins. So Aquarius is right in the middle of those two signs, being flanked by the very beginning of a season and the sign that is looking after the end of the season. And this perspective of being able to see the past and seeing the future almost like equal distance away, right? It's right in the middle, so it can see back to when the winter began, and it can also see equally just as far away this coming thing that is about to be the light taking over from the darkness. So those are symbolic motifs for Aquarius being a sign of, or a time of the year when that quality where people always associate with Aquarian people is like, oh, they're forward thinking or they're progressive. And that's because Saturn here sees what's coming up. It anticipates the light that is soon to replace an existing order, or like an existing way of doing things. So it often relates to the contradictedness of being a sign that is connected to tradition. Saturn, right? Tradition, the things that are old, the establishment, the hierarchy, or the way that things have been, the monolithic old institutions. Aquarius and Saturn, Saturn's sign of Aquarius oftentimes will almost hold contradiction. It says, yeah, this is the way it's done. This is what has been established as the proper or popular or accepted viewpoint. This is the way it's always been done. This is the tradition. This is the old established, thing. But then at the same time, it can vie for something progressive that throws all of that off. So if you've ever known Aquarian people, you'll notice this contrary nature in them that is almost baffling at times. It seems as though they simultaneously hold up something that is traditional while also espousing for something that is progressive or throws off the convention. And it's, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if you guys know what I'm talking about, but Aquariuses can almost drive you mad because it sounds like that they're holding a contradiction in their minds. It's like, well, you said you wanted to do this, but then you did that. Or you said that this is what you thought about this, but then you also said you think this about the same thing, and those two are opposites. That's where you see the sign being located between Capricorn and Pisces, as Saturn describing the established convention, but also being the planet that sees far beyond and anticipates the coming of the light ahead. So this describes a new moon in this sign that could hearken to rejecting a convention in favor of perhaps something that we want to innovate and bring forward, be progressive about, think about in a new way. And there you have, now if we add back in Uranus, I believe there you have where you get that square energy with the new moon to Uranus, because the square was said to be of the nature of Mars, right? So there's that edgy tension that fights or establishes or is almost, it tries to be independent and free. A new moon square at Uranus is saying, I'm going to fight for something different. I'm going to fight to throw off convention. I'm going to fight to be free or find or liberate something. But the new moon in Aquarius says precisely the same thing. I see something coming ahead that even though I hold some sense of traditionalism or I understand what is the convention, I'm going to reject this now. Maybe there's something new or a new way of seeing something. I'm going to innovate and come up or invent something, invent a new way of doing things, or try things in a different way, in a different light, because there's something coming ahead. There's a progressive thing that is happening on the horizon where we are halfway between the end of winter and the beginning of winter. There is going to be a new order that comes, and I see that very clearly. So what this really reminds me of is Aquarius being that inventive, innovative sign. It really speaks to, like, how like science or medicine or like nutritional health or something like that, right? You know how oftentimes when a scientist or when science puts forward like a theory, and that theory holds water for, I don't know, 50 years, 100 years, whatever it is, right? First they say the Earth is the center of the solar system, and then something comes along and there is an innovation that that goes against that. That's a lot like this new moon. The new moon in Aquarius is almost, when you think about the water pourer as that image of Aquarius pouring out the water, the new moon is saying there may be a convention, a previous way of doing things, or a previous way of thinking about things that I'm going to pour out. I'm going to reject it because I see something coming forward that is different. I need to fill that cup up with something new. That is a lot like when science has to make that changeover from the established conventional theory that has held water for the last whatever years. There was a time when doctors were advocating that smoking was good for you, right? And this is largely, of course, we know now, because there were lobbyist interests involved with promoting the tobacco industry, of course. And it's interesting that you can almost argue anything and make anything seem right if you argue it a particular way. If you're clever enough to persistently argue something and you have a good argument, you can almost convince people that anything is true, right? But this is rather like the tension that comes when something happens in the world or inside of us or something like that, that says, obviously smoking is not good for you. And what happens to the medical professionals or the institutions that have held that, that have exposed that theory or that medical doctrine or whatever it is? That's real tense for them. So if we pour something out as the water pourer, we reject something in favor of trying to try something new or fill up our cup with different water, an innovation, a new idea that sparks along the next month or so. We're going to get that tension that you could also see with the square between the sun and Uranus, or the new moon in Uranus, that is emblematic of when you reject something, obviously, that has been conventional, you get pushback by other people, right? That is how I think you could compare the modern approach of seeing the new moon square Uranus with the traditional approach. We're back in the ancient world, and you're reading this cuneiform tablet as a subscriber of mine that I banged out in my shack, that didn't even feature Uranus because it wasn't discovered yet. So that is what I would say, is that, first of all, you have kind of a theme of the new moon in Aquarius rejecting a convention in favor of something more innovative or something that is new. And then that image of the water pourer, what is he pouring out? Well, he's pouring out something that has been, something of the old establishment, a way that has been working, or the theory that has been in power, or something along those lines. And on a personal level, we could decide we need to empty that out, fill something up that is different, that is progressive, looking ahead. so on and so forth. Okay, well, that's what I have for today. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching. Next week, we'll be back with another Mantic Monday episode. And next week's astrology is really when the month of February begins to really kick. It's going to kick us in the teeth a little bit. So we're getting that Mars Pluto conjunction. That is when Mars moves into the sign of Aquarius that week. And so the month of February, the astrology that is really going to be the game changer, if you will, is really kicking off next week. So come back for Monday's episode next week, and I'll see you then. Until then, I hope you guys have a great week and take care.